old school bodybuilding clothing company. If leg day was yesterday and now you're wondering why toilets are so damn low, you are definitely old school. If you're the only athlete at your gym that knows there's a contest today and it's to see who trains the hardest, you are old school. OSBBC.com for the hardest training athletes.
I'm Dave Palumbo, founder of Species Nutrition. From my earliest bodybuilding days, I believed in only putting the best in my body. And that lives on in the Species Nutrition line of products. I put my name and reputation on every bottle of Species Nutrition products. If you want to be your absolute best, join the evolution. Welcome back to RXMuscle's Iron Road to the Olympia 2020, brought to you by Species Nutrition and Old School Clothing. I'm Dave Palumbo, and today's guest is a great one. It's my pleasure to welcome back to the show, four-time Mr. Olympia, Jay Cutler. How's it going, Jay?
Great to be back on. It seems like every year around this time we're doing these conversations.
Yeah. Well, you know, I respect your opinion. You have very good insight into bodybuilding, and you know all the competitors. You've competed against them. Obviously, you've competed against Phil Heath, and people want your insights into what you think about this year's lineup, which I think is actually, even though we're missing a bunch of guys, I think it's a pretty well-matched lineup. What are you thinking?
I think this year it's pretty much anyone's game. I think, you know, before Phil Heath joined, it was kind of like it's a real toss-up. Even though we have a returning champion, you know, there's a lot of people that have the ability to step up to that level. And we've witnessed a lot of Olympias, including some of the ones that I was in, especially against Ronnie Coleman, where it was kind of a predetermined, well, we know who's going to be the winner, right?
Right.
So I think this year it's exciting. We need some excitement after the year we've all endured. So I think a lot of people are finally looking for this show to happen and see who comes out on top.
You know, had Jake Wood not bought this Olympia, I'm convinced that there would be no Olympia this year. Would you agree with that, knowing the powers that were running the show before that?
I agree with you. I mean, it's a miracle that he's even pulled it off. I mean, whatever, 3-4 weeks out from the contest, moving it to Orlando. I mean, I don't know if I was hosting the show, I don't know if that would.
You would have canceled it. You would have canceled it.
Yeah, I would have canceled it.
You're a businessman. Now you're going to be out there in a different capacity. You're going to be representing Trifecta Food Delivery. Is that right?
Yes, I'll be out there representing Trifecta, and of course, I mean, I was kind of the face guy last year. I was the official ambassador, and, you know, being in Las Vegas, and that was the first time they did that kind of ambassador role. I think Shaquille O'Neal is now the ambassador for this year's contest, but it's an obligation to me, Dave. I think you know, I deserve, you know, number one, to give the fans everything that will be there. You know, I should be there supporting, and of course the athletes. I mean, I've been on that stage. I've battled the best. You know, I've won and lost that contest. I was second to last at my first. So there's no one on that stage that will have a different experience than myself, coming from last to first pretty much. So I've been through it all, and, you know, I love to see that experience and give these guys that support, especially, like I said, they all worked extremely hard and probably been anticipating the show a little longer than they'd like to.
Now, you were one of the few champions, Jay, I got to give you kudos for this, that actually calls up other competitors, calls up champions, and gives them advice. You're a guy who, like tries to mentor these guys and give them your experience. Not many other bodybuilders who have won the Olympia do that. It's like they stop competing and then they disappear, and you really don't see that mentorship. You know, is that something that you feel obligated to do, or is it something you enjoy doing?
I think honestly, I'm still a fan. I mean, there's a lot of guys that I'm a fan of, and, you know, to do an analysis of this contest, remember, I don't have a favorite, meaning I'm not necessarily closer to one guy more than another. Would I love to see certain people break through? I love to see the guys move up, similar to like I did, moving from 8th to, second place, controversially,
Sure.
almost winning. But there's just so much potential for everyone. And it can change contest to contest. But more importantly, like I said, I've always been a guy that's been backstage. I remember Brandon Curry in his first Mr. Olympia. I went up to him and said, don't, give it all your best. Because, your expectations are never like, hey, I'm going to be in the first call out. Some people maybe. And I think there's some guys in their first Olympia this year, by the way, that can be in that first call. But your expectations are like, man, I made it to the Olympia stage. That's our dream. I'm sure that was a dream of yours.
Yeah.
And we always say we just want to stand on that stage, but it came to the point like, screw that, I want to win this thing.
Well, Antoine Vaillant told me today when I interviewed him that you called him up and you said, hey, what are you thinking about the Olympia? And he said, well, I'm just happy to be there. And you said, no. You got to go there with the mindset that you want to win the show. And you actually even told him every Olympia you ever went to, including the one you didn't place at all, you went there with the mindset, I'm going to win this thing.
Yeah, I think I told him more realistically, you want to stand next to the best. And as kind of a guy that analyzes now and competed, if you're standing next to the best, you're running, right?
Right, of course.
So that's kind of your goal, is to get the comparisons. I mean, I can't tell you how many times, in 99, my first one, and the second one, I didn't get to stand next to Ronnie Coleman, Flex Wheeler,
right.
Sean Ray, all those guys. It wasn't until 2001 where I actually got a chance to stand next to them. And, it showed, I was able to overcome the guys that I idolized. So it's a respect factor. You don't want to go in there and say, man, I'm coming to win this thing, because people look at you a little sideways. But I think it's more, hey, I want to stand next to the best.
Right. Well, Tony Freeman always used to say, put me next to these guys. Just compare me next to these guys. Let me just stand next to them. And I think that's what we all want, right? I want to see how I stack up against Phil Heath, because he's the best. And so if I can hold my own against him, then I know that I got what it takes, right?
Yeah, and to go back to Tony, man, he should have been in a few call-outs.
Yeah.
He finished in that 5th place, I think, one year, and he really should have been standing with the top 3,
Right. Now, you had another added level of experience. You actually lost the Olympia in 08 to Dexter, and then you came back in 09 and got it back, something that we've never seen before, aside from, I guess, Franco Palumbo, but he didn't really lose it. What would you give advice-wise to Phil now, coming back after, skipping last year's Olympia? He's got the 7 wins, but obviously, people are super micro-focused on the abdominal section. He looked his best, and yet he still didn't win because he had some abdominal issues. What advice do you give Phil to stay laser-focused going into this show, trying to win number 8?
I don't think there's any advice I can give to. I mean, the guy won a lot of Olympias, right? He won more than me. He was second to me. He's been great since the beginning. He's 3rd in his first Mr. Olympia in 2008. He works with Hani, and Hani, they I'm sure had a game plan to prepare him to come back. The only indifference is, he's been sitting out now a lot longer than I did. I mean, I came back the next year.
Yeah.
And, we talk about ring rust with boxers and that kind of stuff. I don't know, with bodybuilding, I can tell you, Dave, when I sat out 2012 after losing in 11, tearing the bicep, and I came back in 13, and let's be realistic, I was a shadow of myself, right?
Yeah.
So to come out and realize what real life is, and you've experienced this now, being off the stages and turning your life into something else, you kind of realize around you, hey, there's a lot more than this. And I'm really surprised Phil Heath came back.
Really?
Because I thought once he sat and took on real life things that he probably never had prior to, worrying about the Olympia each year, because the day you win the Olympia, the next day you're already thinking about the next one, right?
Right.
So I think he'll, he's got to have the mindset to come in. He can't worry about anyone else. He can't worry about the biggest factor is, there's a returning champion. The returning champion is favored, right?
Right.
I think this is the first time we've ever seen that, for once, the returning champion is not necessarily favored to win this contest. And that speaks volumes because of Phil Heath's physique. I mean, he's got it all. If the midsection's in play, he's good to go. I mean, I don't see anyone beating Phil Heath.
As you know, we know as bodybuilders age, things change about their bodies. You know, the elasticity of the skin is not as good. You know, the midsection seems to get a little bigger as we get older. You know, all these little things that go along with that. Do you think Phil still has the firepower, the tool set to win the Olympia at this point?
Absolutely. I mean, we've never seen muscle insertions, the way the skin lays on muscle, such as Phil Heath, the fibers. That's the difference. And you know, I think Brandon, if you want to compare, like, you know, Mr. Olympia and, you know, a former, like those two, and, you know, I could put Dexter Jackson there too, but, you know, Phil Heath, when he turns around, you know, from the back is where he can really dominate, from the calves to the hamstring, the striations, you know, and then the back double bicep, we know is kind of unbeatable on that stage. So, you know, there's a lot of poses that Brandon can stand with him, but there's a lot from the side. Phil just has a lot of detail,
Right. Now, obviously, if Phil could, you know, you always said right in the beginning that Phil should play to his strengths, but, you know, is there this risk of Phil like looking at himself and saying, well, they're so super micro focused on my midsection, I got to come in tapered. And you know what happens when you do that, Jay? You can lose the wow and the roundness and the cartoonish if you come in too flat or too depleted. Is that a risk for Phil? Because then, you know, he obviously is not the widest guy on stage, and when he loses that wow, sometimes his physique doesn't quite look, you know, like we want it to look, so to speak.
You listen, there's a lot of variables, but I would imagine that he's kind of got this figured out. I think he definitely has to think about not trying to be overblown to come into this contest, because that's what caused, you know, the stomach to get a little pushy the last couple years. And then, you know, saw him lose everything else. I mean, if you really look at the physique besides the midsection in that contest, that's really, everything else was still a Mr. Olympia caliber, right? So I think, you know, he has to walk that line and just try not to overeat that last week. That's going to give him that push, but still hold enough fullness. And listen, he could sacrifice a little fullness, I think.
This is a very valid point. Do you think the internet and social media and YouTube and all these, you know, armchair analysts who were put, you know, with big followings, who are putting out the bubble gut and the midsection, you think that almost worked against Phil? Like, in other words, if that wasn't there and we were back in the 90s, would Phil have won that show?
Yeah, I think they weren't. I think, I'm not going to sit there and the judges called him after the show. There was an official that called him and said, Phil, hey, fix your stomach. I think he realized that in 17, the stomach was a little, it was a little bit of an eyesore. And I compare it to my 07 to 08 issue, where, you know, I came in off in 07, you know, I came in 08 and I wasn't 100, and that's when I lost to Dexter. It's kind of like, okay, you can show up one year and have a slight miss of the mark, but if you come in the following year and you haven't fixed that issue, then you're going to get pushed off. And that show, honestly, Dave, I mean, I wasn't, like I said, I mean, Phil Heath was my guy, but he could have won that show. He could have won. And no one would have necessarily, I mean, what would people have done? Oh, he had an extended stomach. Has that happened before? Yes, of course it has. So
I've seen it with Dorian.
I'm not going to say it could have gone either way. It wasn't like it was 100%, you know, Sean Roden destroyed him. That wasn't the case.
All right, let's talk about this lineup. We talked about, obviously, Phil. We've talked about Brandon a little bit. We can talk a little bit more about Brandon in a minute. But who else do you see as a dangerous guy who could come in here and win this show? From the Winklaars, obviously William Bonac, who was third last year. Obviously, we have Dexter, is always dangerous in this lineup. Who do you like, and who do you think is someone that we should watch out for that can sneak in here and maybe even steal the Olympia?
I think Bonac and I think Hadi Chupin, those two are your two most dangerous guys. You know, I want to give Ramy his props because, you know, of course, he's here. He's going to compete in the show. I hear he looks tremendous. But I think I feel really people have disrespected Bonnick this year because this guy's been battling Brandon. You know, he was second last year, and it seems like because he's living over, I don't know if he's in Holland or somewhere, he's just not getting the airtime, and people aren't necessarily talking about him. I know he's smaller stature, but that guy is the closest comparison to Phil Heath that we have on that stage with the round pop muscle. And when, you know, we sit there and rave about Phil Heath's genetics and the roundness and the fullness and the overlay and everything else, you got to look at Bonnick, and he's just a shorter version of Phil Heath in some sort of capacity. So I think he's very dangerous. And Chupin last year, I mean, he arguably could have won that contest. I mean, I sat in the front row. That guy's hard as nails. I think he needed to improve a little bit, but I mean, if he's not motivated from getting third last year, if he shows up, I mean, it could be a lot of trouble for everyone, you know. But, you know, besides Phil Heath and Brandon, I mean, you have a lot of people that could come in there. I mean, Dexter, I mean, he can be in that conversation on that top five, but pushing those top spots, I would still think that those three guys, Bonnick, you know.
What about Ruley Winklaar in this conversation?
I had him winning last year. You know, I picked him prior to the contest to win. I just don't know with Rolly. I mean, the question mark with Rolly is how his legs are going to look. He's got the crazy upper body, but, you know, it just seems like when it comes down to dialing in, you know, we haven't seen Rolly put it 100% together except over in Australia or somewhere where he won that show. He was third that one year at the Olympia, which he was impressive, but he still wasn't, you know, that was the year Phil Heath was off. And, you know, I wasn't necessarily pushed to the top spot.
He obviously size-wise and freakiness has what it takes, but like you said, we haven't seen the conditioning from him. But you make a very good point. I want to just clarify, obviously Bonnick was second last year, but when Bonac squared off against Brandon at the Arnold earlier in the year and lost by, I don't know, what was it, like a split hair point, I don't know what it was. I mean, that I thought was the best Bonac we had ever seen, and Brandon kind of really, I mean, you could have flipped the coin. You know, I think he just narrowly defeated him. If we see a Bonac like that on this Olympia stage, I think, you know, there's a lot of danger coming from this guy, you know.
Yeah, he suffered a couple shows with the legs downsized a little bit because that was one of his signature points, was the lower portion, right? So supposedly his legs are back to normal, and I mean, you can't pack much more muscle on that guy. You know, he does have a couple poses where, you know, I kind of look and I say, you know, he could be better in this, but we all know everyone has their weak points on the Olympia stage. Not every Mr. Olympia is 100% on every shot. Very rarely does that happen. So I would say, you know, this guy, because we haven't heard anything about him. We haven't heard anything. We haven't seen much. So for me, I'm really anticipating him looking pretty tremendous at this show.
Yeah. Bonac is one of these guys, when you don't hear from him, he's super dangerous. A lot of guys, when you don't hear from him, like if you don't see Ramy pictures, you know that Ramy's probably not at his best. But Bonac, when he's hiding out, that's when he's the most dangerous, I think.
Yeah, I'm excited to watch. Like I told you, it's going to be a close show between a lot of competitors.
Have you ever spoken to Ramy, you know, and given him any advice?
I mean, we were texting a little bit before the Arnold this year, you know, the early season, and he was sending me some updated pictures, and, you know, he's kind of been under the radar. I haven't heard from him lately, and, you know, I always told him the same thing that everybody's told him. You don't have to be so big. Just worry about, I just hate that people are like, oh, come down in the 280 and you'll be good. It's not about the weight sometimes, Dave. It's just, you know, you got to go by the mirror and say, okay, what's going to be the best condition? And we all know the guy has more muscle than almost everyone. In certain areas, especially the legs. The legs need to come down a little bit in order for the balance to look right. But he's been second. I mean, if he shows up his best ever, we'll see. I mean, the problem is, you know, he just hasn't hit it yet. And we've been talking about this since 2013. I mean, it's 7 years later, and we're still waiting, right?
And 7 coaches later, too.
Yeah, so, you know, it's hard as you get older, right? You usually peak into your late 30s, and, you know, there's the rare cases that people go into their 40s and compete. I mean, 20 years ago, it was unheard of that a guy competes at 40 years old at the biggest contest in the world, except for the Albert Beckel days or whatever, but that was a few anomalies of that kind of stuff.
Yeah. So do you think that Ramy well, let me ask you this question. As a guy who's got very good insight into looking at people and analyzing what's going on, what do you think is wrong? What's going wrong in the Ramy camp? Is it him not listening? Is it these coaches not being able to figure out his body? Is it that people see him and then they think it's going to be easy, and then at the last minute they panic? Why hasn't anyone really dialed in? Personally, I think, and I'm not just saying this because we both are friends with Chris, I think Chris nailed it the best with him the 1 year he worked with him, and when he hit that Arnold Europe show, I thought he was his best ever. But it seems like people have trouble getting this guy in shape.
From the outside in, Dave, I'd have to say, and this, I don't know anything about his nutrition, but I would probably say the guy is a genetic wonder where it probably doesn't take a lot of calories for him to be as big as he is.
Right.
So when you work with someone, you think, okay, the guy's huge. He's 300 pounds. I have to feed him enough for a 300-pound bodybuilder. So if you follow what kind of tools we all use as nutritionists,
right,
to diet people down, I would think that the guy probably has to basically eat a lot less calories than I ever had to dial down. And I think that's where the confusion is. And, you can put the guy on 3 hours of cardio a day, but maybe that doesn't work. But I see him as like a low carb dieter, which can be a little tricky sometimes because, sometimes the body just fights to take the rest of the body fat off, and it's hard to dial him down. That's my opinion. And I think, there's confusion with him, and I think it's nerves. I think he has nerves when he gets up there because there's so much pressure on this guy. Because when you have the name Big Ramy, what are the expectations, right?
Right. You're right. So, no, it's funny, but it's you're right, 100%.
I mean, remember Nasser Al-Sambadi, how big he was, right? He was way ahead of the time.
Right.
I mean, he was a guy that competed at 280.
Yeah.
And, he was in great condition. Yeah. And, I mean, he was knocking at Dorian's door a couple times. And it just from the backside, he just wasn't as comparable. But, I mean, realistically, he was one of the freakiest bodybuilders we've ever seen.
Absolutely. And he had reckless cockiness, which is why I believe he was so good, because he really believed he was that good,
Yeah. Yeah, so it's the big question mark. I mean, I don't work with the guy. I don't know what he eats. I don't know how he trains. I've seen a few videos, but I just think, sometimes the people around you, you got to kind of solitude yourself and just kind of follow your own path.
Now, let's go to the next kind of tier of people. Not that they're another tier, but, some of the new guys coming into the show. Hunter Labrada, for instance, he won his pro debut at the Tampa show. A lot of people are, talking very highly of him. He seems to have improved from Tampa going into the Olympia. I just interviewed him. He looks great. What do you expect to see from him at his first Olympia?
He's a guy that could break the top 6.
Really? First time out?
I think so. I think he has the capability. If he comes in crazy condition, he really could knock off some of these top guys that we mentioned. I mean, we don't know how Dexter, Rowley, if you push the top 6, 7, I mean, you're always going to put the guys that have been there before. But, one of those guys are going to probably hit the mark, and Hunter could leapfrog one of these guys. But I don't see him being out of the top 10. I think he's going to make an impact because if he shows up anything like Tampa, he won Tampa Pro, right?
Yeah,
or New York, or
Tampa. Yeah.
So he was impressive there. I mean, he's still 250s, and he needs a little more from the backside, but I mean, some of his front shots are just astounding at this point.
Yeah, and it's kind of like Ghosts-like when you see him because he looks just like his dad, facially.
Bigger version.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Now, Ian Valliere, I just interviewed him a little while ago, and he's got structurally, like I always compare him to Dennis Wolf. He's got a big structure like you did, like Dennis Wolf did, like Gunther did, which usually bodes very well on an Olympia stage. Where do you see him falling, and what would you like to see him look like on that stage? What should he do to move into that upper echelon?
I mean, I know he got a lot of criticism, because he was on or off at these couple shows that he did qualify at, but he looked, he's a great bodybuilder. I mean, structure-wise, once the guy fills out, he's going to be, he could be battling those top positions. But, if he's improved a little bit, and I think we're only going to see really a conditioning improvement from him.
Yeah.
Because it's such a short span from the time he's had to really dial it down. I mean, you could see him pushing, he could be in top 10 pretty easy. it really comes down to, how he looks compared to these guys. But the most he has in his arsenal is his structure, right?
Right.
He's gonna outsize a lot of guys, and if the condition's there, I mean, that's really what's gonna put him above some of these other guys.
Where do we see Akeem Williams? I mean, he's made some amazing improvements in terms of his conditioning and his stage presence now. He's got a ton of muscle on his body. Standing alone, he looks like the winner all the time. And then when you see him compare to other guys, you see some of his flaws. But where would he fall into this grouping that you're seeing?
I can see him next to Hunter. I can see him battling. I'd like to see that comparison. That would be a great call out because, I think Akeem, he's got a lot of size, but, it's always been that question mark conditioning. And I think his condition's good. It's just that his skin tone, it just doesn't show really how great the condition is. And sometimes that can work against you. I mean, I'm not saying, he's been on or off. He seems to found the formula, Dave.
Yeah.
But it's just, it's all who he stands next to and how the lighting is and what we're going to see. But that guy, I don't know how he packs on any more muscle, to be honest.
You know what? He's a true testament to heavy duty training, really built a lot of muscle. And I know he's been working with Oscar Arden on refining that muscle over the last couple of years. And we've seen a lot more detail come through now. So, like you said, he doesn't need any more muscle at this point. It's more separation, I think, we're looking for on his physique.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's go back to a person I want to talk about, which is really Winklaar. Because I think that he really holds his own destiny in his own hands. If you were advising him, and he's listening or whatever, what would you like to see from Ruley for him to be the absolute best that he can be on stage? What should be the goal at this point for Ruley to bring to the stage? Because obviously we've seen him too flat, we've seen him not conditioned. What's the right look for Ruley Winklaar?
Not trying to battle the scale. I think it's like when he's over in Kuwait and he's training and he's showing these pictures and how round and I think from what I've seen he seems to be a better dialed Ruley. But I think, it's just fine tuning everything. And, he seemed to have it last year. But I just think the last week, he doesn't need to worry about being too full all the time. And that's how I feel. I mean, you mentioned that he's coming flat. So we all have that thought of what we think is flat and what is full. And, as a spectator, you don't see either one because, the guy's got so much muscle. But he's just going to find the right combination and not worry about outsizing people so much because I think he outsizes everyone, the arms, the shoulders, the chest. I mean, it's bananas, some of his shots,
Is he one of these guys, Jay, that is almost better off not doing anything the last week? You know what I'm saying? Like, you see him at 2 weeks out, and the guy looks unbelievable. He's, like, full, he's tight, and he's probably eating very little, low carbs, and he's probably doing a ton of cardio. And you almost want to say, don't change anything because you look great right now. Eat a little bit more and go into the show. I think you're right. I think some of these guys think that because the last 3 days you're supposed to carb up, that's what you do. But sometimes you don't have to do that. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I'm just gonna mention, and people can look back on this, but we talk about, if you go back and you look at Ramy when he won the New York Pro in 2013, you look at Rowley when he won the New York Pro. Like, these guys, I don't know. It's just we fight to get bigger, and trust me, I'm not coming down on these guys because I was victim of this too. I got bigger and bigger, and bigger wasn't better.
Right.
I mean, we compare. Let's take my two best showings at 2001 Olympia and 2009. Right.
Right.
People still say 2001 was bigger. Why? Because I was more streamlined. Phil Heath was his best in 2011.
Absolutely.
He was not better after that.
No.
So we all make that mistake. We eat more. We train heavier. We try to be bigger because we think bigger is better, but sometimes it just works against you. So it's sometimes you got to step back and say, you know what? I got to go back to, what I did in some capacity to the past and, try to duplicate that. And sometimes that haunts a lot of us bodybuilders because you can't, Dave, go back and do what you did 10 years ago, especially with 5 more pounds of muscle, right?
Yeah.
But everyone's trying to be too big. That's my opinion. I was victim of it. Ronnie was victim of it.
Yeah.
And I think Phil became victim of it.
Yeah, I think I think you're right. Ronnie definitely got too big. But we love big, right? As fans, we love big.
Of course.
Talk to me a little bit about Juan Morel. Where do you see him falling in this lineup?
Listen, man, Juan's a busy guy these days. I mean,
he's
had some great showings there. We know the lower portion's always been the downfall with him. I know he's been training with Cormier. I've been in touch with Juan.
Yeah.
I don't know what his expectations are. I think there's some new guys that can come in and probably with a little more detail. I think Juan's got, he's got a lot of fullness. It's just he needs a little more detail to try to break into that top. And I don't know if this is his last, or I don't know if there's the question of that, but
yeah, I'm not sure.
He's having a very successful business now, and I'm sure that's taken a lot of his time. But I definitely can see him battling with these guys, getting the call-outs because he's been there before. But I just see a few guys out detailing him a little bit.
All right. Well, the good, valid insights. Give me a quick. Who do you think is going to win the 212 Olympia?
I'd have to say right now, Kamal has the best shot to do it because I know what he looks like. I've been in touch with Kamal, and he's better than last year, Dave.
Is he the best 50-year-old of all time? We say Dexter, but I think Kamal is making improvements still at 50.
Is
almost
he 50? Is he 50 now?
He's going to be 50 in like another week or two. Yeah.
Man, I don't know. I think we're looking at today is I think if we went back and looked at Albert Beckles and some of these other guys, like they were pretty incredible, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But I think, he's making improvements, which is pretty outrageous at this point. He's been training in the States, which is a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd love to see Lunsford turn it up and really, because I think Lunsford has the best potential, physique-wise.
What about George Peterson?
Yeah, I mean, he's taller, but he definitely, the best back. He would beat most of the guys in the open class in the back shots.
Right. You're right.
I just commented on a picture he posted, some back shot on Instagram. It's crazy. I think he's improved his back.
He's like Kai Green
the question
back.
Mark with him, I don't know how the legs look. I know he did well in that, qualification show, but I'd love to see him standing next. He's just a little taller than some of these guys like a Lunsford and these Kamals, but he's got the detail. He's definitely going to be in the top spots.
Yeah. Breon Ansley, Chris Bumstead, Classic Physique. Who do you like?
Man, that's going to be a battle.
Yeah.
I think they both look their all-time best leading up. If you really look at less weaknesses, I would have to point out Breon. But Chris is just like we talked about, he's a dominating size, width. That really comes down to what they're looking for the standard at this point.
Right.
He is the returning champ, and I think he's improved.
Yeah.
I think he's improved from the past. So sometimes they're judged on, okay, the guy's coming back better. He's definitely in the driver's seat to win, but Breon's going to give him a hell of a run. I can tell you that.
Breon hinted to me that he might, consider moving up and to one of the other classes in bodybuilding.
Well, I thought Breon came from 212 originally.
Yeah, I think he was hinting about doing that. He didn't say 212 or open, but I would assume he was hinting at 212. And because he has to really suck down to make that weight class, I guess, at 190, it's tough for him now. He's put on added size, and I know, he's living in Chris Cormier's house, so they're working together. I'm sure Chris is hypnotizing him with the bodybuilding, talk,
Yeah, and Dave, don't forget last year it was a 1-point show.
I know.
So it was one judge that basically probably, okay, I got Chris over Breon, right? So it can go either way. I think, we're not talking about, hey, it was a big spread last year.
Sure. Well, I will say this, it's going to be a super exciting weekend. I won't be there, but, I know you're going to be out there representing and giving out some trophies. So enjoy the trip, Jay. And I know you're spoiled because it used to be in your backyard all the time. You kind of roll out of bed and you're at the Olympia. Now you got to actually get on an airplane, so...
Yeah, it's a little tougher. I'm just, I haven't had a lot of travel this year, so I'm kind of anticipating at least getting some FaceTime. We talk about, this definitely during the pandemic, we've seen a lot of, this kind of thing. We're on Zooms or Skypes or whatever. but there's nothing like FaceTime. I mean, you still can't.
Sure.
That means a lot to people, and for me to be there and represent it, it's kind of my duty since I've established myself with what I did, and I'm a fan of it still, Dave. I'm not going to lie. I mean, I'm training every day, and I'm still trying to battle Father Time. And,
what are you weighing these days, Jay?
About 245, and I've trained like 45 days in a row. I've taken no days off, so I'm kind of on this mission. And don't ask me why.
You got to get ready for the Olympia. That's why. Well, of course that's why.
I want to stand. I want to look great in that suit.
It's like I was gonna say. It's like the beach. It's like you get ready when you go on vacation. Now you have to get ready for the Olympia every year.
Yeah. Well, we hope it's a successful one, and I think we're going to be grateful and look back many years from now and say, what a year, right?
When you heard that Jay, be honest with me here. I've never asked you this question, but when you heard that Jake Wood bought the Olympia, did you say to yourself, "Hey, maybe that would have been something I might want to have done at some point"?
I didn't hear the number right away, and I know what they were trying to sell it for, so I never honestly thought about it.
Right.
There's a lot more that came with the Olympia, with the magazines, Flex, Muscle and Fitness, all that stuff, and that takes a big staff. I think Jake's trying to get a handle on that right now, but the Olympia definitely. What I just want to say, Dave, before I end the show is, the Olympia started with Joe Weider. As we know, he sat around, he started, he was drinking the beer with Larry Scott or whatever, and they came up with this Mr. Olympia theme, right?
Yeah.
And every year we competed in respect to Joe Weider. We were athletes. I mean, Joe Weider paid all the athletes to basically qualify. That was part of our contract. And, it was it was his event. And I think it's kind of lost that respect of Joe Weider. And, it's still Joe Weider's Mr. Olympia. And so that's why I always look at the Olympia differently from a lot of the other guys, especially the new guys that didn't have the relationship with Joe, which I did. And that's how, I'm always going to show respect to that contest. And, man, I would love to carry that legacy of Joe Weider, because we've sat in a lot of conversations, and his passion was unparalleled to anyone else,
I could have seen Jay Cutler as the president of the Mr. Olympia contest.
Hey, you never
know what could happen, right? You never know. Hey, Jay, thanks so much for taking time out of your schedule. I know you got a lot of stuff going on. What's going on? I know you guys had a crazy Black Friday sale, huh? For Jay Cutler.
Yeah, we had a week-long sale, and it was tremendous. And I can't tell you, we had a great year, considering all the circumstance, and great feedback, and I'm just happy to be a part of the industry and continue to give back. And I appreciate you bringing me on. I always like giving my analysis. I hate to hurt any feelings, but at least you didn't put me on the spot and ask me who's definitely going to win the contest. No, because
I knew you'd hedge your bets on that one. Now, the other thing is that your YouTube channel has really blown up a lot as well. I mean, you're cranking out there. That's
I'm doing a lot. Dave Borlay now, who films a lot of the content, lives in Las Vegas now. He moved from California, and we're trying to put a lot of faces on the channel that might not have the FaceTime because their lack of ability to be on those platforms. And and I have to thank yourself and everyone else that keeps the news out there. We talked about this in a video this morning. I actually did a jaywalking. We talked about how the magazines had these little gossip sections, and every month that's how we got the news, especially someone like you living in New York. I was in Boston, and we look forward to those. Like, you're doing your little your morning of
Muscle in the
kind
morning
of thing, and that's that kind of mimics what we used to look forward to in the magazine, right? But that's, we're trying to bring that back a little bit and give everyone airtime, because I think, we just don't get enough out of the athletes because they don't have the visibility enough on their own.
Very good. Yeah, I'm glad you're doing that. Look, you know what? I always tell people, I say Jay doesn't even need them. I always ask you, I'm like, why do you even bother doing this? You don't even need the money, but you really do have a passion for bodybuilding still. You love doing it. You like being involved in the industry. And you know what? When you like what you're doing, it's not work. I try to explain to people that. And I guess, they don't understand. And when you like something, you're good at it too, because you put a lot of time and devotion into it.
Yeah, listen, there's a lot of superstars in the making, and I love to be a part of that. So that's what excites me the most. Thanks again, Jay, and good luck in Vegas there, and keep representing. See you soon, Dave. All right, guys, that's going to take us to the end of another episode of RX Muscle's Iron Road to the Olympia 2020, brought to you by Old School Clothing and Species Nutrition. I'm Dave Palumbo. We'll see you next time.